In this episode, we sit down with Subhash, the founder of Maroofy.com, an AI search engine for music. We discuss AI-generated music.
Imagine like a normal image diffusion model, but instead of doing text as input, it would be like Maroofy's embedding vector, and then it would try to generate like the 5-10 seconds.
Live streaming deepfakes.
I was watching Twitch, and I came across this like really cool AI live stream, and it was basically an AI version of Trump and AI version of Biden debating each other. They'll be roasting the chat as it goes, and it was hella funny.
And we brainstorm AI product ideas, like creating the slowest self-driving car ever.
I don't even know if this is possible, but if you can take multiple images, so you add an image of the office floor plan, for example, and then you add an image, you take an image of where the robot, or like the car is right now. I feel like it could probably reason, okay, I'm in the kitchen.
And if you listen closely, you'll hear glimpses of Subhash talking about what becomes his next company, comfyworkflows.com. Let's get started.
In college, I was basically training this AI model to kind of like analyze music audio. And so you give it music audio and output like genres, moods, stuff like that, instruments, stuff like that. Put up a demo on Hacker News. I went to the front page, and that gave me a customer, essentially, that wanted to pay for an API. So that started me down the rabbit hole of the whole training AI models, and I started in music. And so what I was trying to do is basically try to figure out, okay, could you train an AI model to learn music similarity, essentially, and then just try to find what would the AI consider as similar music. So I basically crawled a bunch of song previews from the internet, and then just basically got an AI model indexing them. And then the way I trained it is basically learned music similarity from the songs itself. So there's no explicit training data. It just learns to model the music, and then it produces embeddings. And then you just basically do nearest neighbors, normal embedding search, like text embeddings, and except this is like music embeddings. And I basically put it behind a search engine. But I built this like a while ago. I put it online, but then didn't really give much attention to marketing and stuff like that. It was just like sitting idle. And then I did Bill Space, then Nights a Week in season 2, and then the second day of IRL, I put it online because I saw people launching stuff. Like, yeah, I should actually try posting this. So I posted a couple of times Hacker News before, didn't really do that well. But this time I posted with a much better title, and just it worked. So I went to the front page that day. It hit #1, and then it's just a lot of people just trying it out. But yeah, it was an interesting experience. It was mostly out of just curiosity. Yeah.
Can you talk more about how you actually created those embeddings and what was involved in that, or the challenges, I guess, you faced when you were actually creating that product?
Yeah, so the way I trained the model is to teach it music similarity. I basically said, okay, you take a song, you split it in two, and then you basically say, okay, if I give you the first half, the embedding you produce for the first half has to be super similar to the embedding you produce for the second half. And then you do that, and then you compare it. You basically compare the embeddings, and you teach the model to basically produce embeddings that follow that constraint. Most of the challenge was actually that it would pick up on stuff that humans would not pick up on, which is actually a drawback. So it would pick up on stuff like a little bit of white noise, like the sound characteristics, stuff like that, sound quality. So it would use that to tell like, oh, these two are the same songs, these are different songs. But then when you try to do search on top of that, it wouldn't be that useful because it wouldn't pick up on stuff that humans perceive to be like similar. So that was like the biggest challenge that I was stuck on for a bit. And then I figured out some techniques, did some data augmentation, and that eventually solved that drawback. Yeah, that's basically it. It's like a super small model too, because I don't have like that many resources. So yeah, I trained it for I think a little bit over a day on a single server, and yeah, that's pretty much it.
And what were some of the techniques that you found to make the model better specifically? Yeah, I'm curious.
Well, I
what
think
that process was like.
2 techniques helped in particular. So one was like data augmentation. So like the music that I trained on, like you add some like you intentionally distort the audio a little bit. You add some white noise. You change the frequency a little bit, the pitch a little bit. You cut the audio to be shorter. You do stuff like that to mess up the audio a little bit. And so it basically forces the model to pick up on stuff that are not the superficial sound quality related things. And then training on more data I found to also help. And also there's a few important hyperparameters you need to tune. The length of the audio it considers. If it only considers like 2 seconds, it's not enough to produce a really good embedding. So actually by just constraining the length of the audio, the embeddings it produces would be different. So if you force the input to be like 2 seconds, it would focus a lot on the sound quality type of stuff, the sample sound, stuff like that. Whereas if you make it focus on 10 seconds, it would try to model a lot of things, like language. It was some interesting things I found was that when I trained the model, it also picked up on a lot of stuff that wasn't music. So I tweeted about this as well. So I basically searched for a podcast, an audiobook recording from the speaker, and I was trying to see what it would come up with. And interestingly, it came up with other audiobook recordings from the same speaker first, and then other audiobook recordings from other speakers, then other non-music speech data like newscasts, and then it was like songs. So it was able to prioritize that automatically, which was interesting because the training objective is just like simply like splitting two songs and then trying to figure out that. But by learning that, because songs also have a lot of vocals, it picked up on that. So that was like something interesting I found. And yeah, and the embeddings are super small, so like only 256 dimensional embeddings. So like really small vectors, but it encodes a lot of information. So obviously you can easily make the model a lot better by just making it bigger, increasing the dimensions of the embeddings, and then just training on more data.
And where did you find this data?
I just crawled the internet. I just scraped a bunch of song previews online.
And so with those song previews, what type of length?
30 seconds.
30 seconds. Yeah.
Did you scrape those from Spotify's preview API or?
There are a couple sources.
Yeah.
A couple APIs. Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. And are audio embeddings different to text embeddings at all?
Well, I think the way you come up with text embeddings is different than the way you come up with audio embeddings. So for me, at least, the way you come up with audio embeddings is to follow this constraint. But for text, it depends on the objective. So if you're trying to predict the next word, for example, then the embeddings, I think, will move towards encoding meaning of the words, right? So the training objectives, the way you train them is different. But yeah, but you once you have the embeddings, you can then do the same things as you can do for text embeddings, and you can do like arithmetic as well. So you can be like, you take a song that has just piano, take a song that has like rap, and then you can add their vectors, and then you can do like a weighted average, and it will find songs like with that proportion of like piano and rap. So it's pretty cool.
So on that, I remember when I first discovered embeddings, and I was like, holy shit! Like you can do arithmetic on it. It's like you could make a game which is like Wordle, but not really. Mm-hmm. And you give like a certain word plus a certain word, and then the person has to guess the final word. It's like, what's...
like man, king, woman, like queen, and then... woman.
Yeah, man plus crown.
Yeah.
And so the game is you just have to guess the right word.
Right. When Word2Vec first came out, I remember they were on the release, they included a lot of examples, and a lot of them were like analogies, where you can basically use word embeddings to solve analogies, like doing vector arithmetic. And that's what got me interested into the whole concept of, this is like hella cool. Like, how do you do vectors? How do you do embeddings?
And so expanding from that, as you did Maroofy, what other ideas did you have of continuing?
Well, so the first idea that came to mind is once I built the search engine, people used it, but retention wasn't really well. People would try it once or twice. But from just trying out the vector arithmetic stuff, I realized there's so much information encoded in these vectors. So I was like, okay, what would be an interesting extension? So one thing I tried was just training a model to generate 5 to 10 seconds of audio from the embedding vector. So just imagine like a normal image diffusion model, but instead of doing text as input, it would be like Maroofy's embedding vector, and then it would try to generate like the 5-10 seconds. And that's when I found that these 256 numbers are like encode so much information, because in the generated sound, it's a very primitive model, like only trained it on like 100,000 song previews, like very little data. I trained it for about, I think, 2 days. And it's low quality, but you can see that the model in the outputs, it would even include like some vocals with some words, baby and stuff like that, and ooh, ahs and stuff like that. So all that information a lot of it was like encoded in the vectors, which was super interesting. And then you can do vector arithmetic, so you can do like piano and rap, stuff like that. You can take a piano song, get its embedding vector, get a rap song, get its embedding vector, do a weighted average, pass it through the model. It would generate like a rap song with piano, but like only 10 seconds. Low quality. So that was like an interesting thing I'm still working on. I'm still like trying to solve like some kinks, try to make it like better quality.
When you say quality, what do you mean?
Like this audio quality. So right now I'm using 16 kilohertz audio quality, so super downsampled data, just to get the idea, figure out all the idea. Because then at the end, once you have it all promising, you just literally scale up the audio sampling rate. So I'm trying to now, the one I'm working on right now is trying to do 32 to 44 kilohertz sample rate. But I'm experimenting with a few different approaches right now to see what we can do. Yeah.
What do you mean by different approaches?
So there's two main approaches I'm considering. One is like a diffusion-based approach, and one is like a language model-based approach. So if you look at like Music Gen from Facebook, they train like a language model approach to like music generation. So instead of generating words, they generate these audio tokens. And these audio tokens comes from a codec model. Like it's called, for Facebook, it's called encodec. For Google's one, it's called SoundStream. Essentially what it does, it takes audio, let's say 5 seconds of audio, and converts it to a series of vectors. Imagine like word embeddings that represent that sequence of audio samples. And then you just train a normal language model to predict like, these music tokens. And then once you predict the music tokens, you just pass it back into the codec model to generate the corresponding audio, and you can listen to it. So it's basically a way to downsample, because the audio data is like huge, right? So if it's like an audio, for example, with 16,000 kilohertz sample rate, that's 16,000 samples per second, right? So you can't literally just plug that into a model. It'd be too big. So yeah, you use some sort of you can use some sort of encodec model. So that's one approach. Another approach is to do something like the diffusion model. And in Stability actually, I think, released stable audio recently. So that's like a diffusion-based approach to audio generation. So you use like, instead of representing image latent vectors, you represent audio latent vectors. And then you do the normal diffusion process. And then, yeah. So they have these two different approaches also have two different things you can do with it. So with diffusion, you can do everything that you can do with normal diffusion models. You can do in painting, and you can do stuff like that. And with the language model approach, you can also do audio prompting, stuff like that. So it's just like two different approaches. They also require two different types of resource requirements. So I'm just experimenting what's possible. Like, yeah.
And do you have a goal in mind as you're working through some of this? I know that there are a lot of people thinking about music generation as like the crown jewel of audio generally.
Right.
Can you make something that's nice to listen to, right? Because I think these models get better and better. I still haven't seen one where you listen to it and you're like, oh, wow, that's like that song I'd put on 100%. In the car.
Yeah.
That seems like it's a ways off, but I'm curious if you have thoughts there.
Yeah, the way I'm trying to think about it is what's the best V1 model to build that can produce like value that's better than what's out there today? Can it do something novel? So if you want to do like complete music generation, I feel like it's going to be super expensive, at least right now. And it'll take a lot of research and time to produce like a song that's like way better. But I feel like there are models you can build that kind of enable artists or like people create music to do like cool things with existing content. Like AI models that modify existing content, for example. Those models are able to do something that's better than what's out there today. So those produce value, you get users, and you use that to bootstrap bigger, ambitious models. So that there's one approach. That's the approach I'm more interested in.
So you could do something like turn any song into a DJ Snake remix.
Right.
You just give it the song and it gives you the club version.
Yeah, there's even this site I found, a friend shared it with me, called rave.dj. And what it does is it basically, you give it two songs and it auto mixes them together. And so that was like a cool example of that is able to produce new content, but it basically just edits existing content. So the model can do it like reasonably well. Yeah. And it's better than, it's just creative, right? It lets people be creative pretty easily. So that's a good model, for example, for a V1. So that's like where my head is at. I want to build something that people would actually use every day. So
yeah, and in terms of figuring out what that thing is, you mentioned that you were #1 on Hacker News, which always drives a lot of traffic. What did you learn from that experience of you on Hacker News, you got one customer out of it, it sounded like that kind of got you to keep going, and then you were on the front page again?
Yeah, so this was like years apart, by the way.
Yeah.
So the first time I hit the front page on Hacker News, I put up basically a demo where you enter a YouTube link, and then it will basically analyze the music in the YouTube link, and then it will play it, and then as it plays, it will show like the emotions that are going on, the instruments that are live, and then as the video progresses, it will change automatically. So it's showing the AI model listening to basically the video. That was what hit front page, and that was like right after high school. It was like during college, like first year, and that unexpectedly gave me my first customer, and then that basically ended up becoming a little business that I'd never intended to start. But it was like it was so cool, because then I now had resources to now go learn, like train models and stuff like that. And so during undergrad, I learned a lot, basically just through like experimentation. And yeah, so that's kind of like, that was like the first experience. And then I basically used that to like launch again. I launched on Hacker News actually a couple of times. None of them really worked until the launch I did on Nights and Weekends season 2, like the IRL. And that's when it like really worked. And that's because I just made the post a lot better. Because Hacker News is a very technical like community. Yeah. So if your post kind of provokes questions within them, technical questions like how'd you build this, like how does it work, stuff like that, then they're like, it will do well on Hacker News. So it worked like the last time I did it. Yeah.
Yeah. And from like a, I guess, product learning standpoint, you get all these eyes on your product. Like, what did you realize? Was there anything where you were like, oh, that's a direction that I could take this? That would be interesting. I mean, it sounds like maybe that led you to where you are now. Yeah,
so the music generation part, I was just interested in, like, mostly from just, like, my own experimentation. From seeing people actually use the product, I saw some people, like, trying to just input YouTube links. So in the way the app currently works is you have to enter a song name, and it'll let you choose from a song from its index, and then you select, and then it'll just retrieve the similar songs. And then what people often try to do is enter a YouTube link thinking it will just analyze it. So that's something I'm actually going to add, because I think what people are trying to do is take existing content from YouTube and then I try to find similar music from that. In case maybe that song might not be in my index or for some reason, stuff like that. So that was an interesting learning. But yeah, that's kind of like one thing I learned.
So you're pretty prolific, right? So you had Maroofy, which we've spent a bunch of time talking about, but you also had Deepfakes.lol, where Gary Tan joined your live stream, and then you also have the Spirals app thing more recently. Can you talk a bit more about how you decide to launch certain ideas or certain projects?
So I was, the weekend before I was supposed to come here for Build Space SF IRL, I was watching Twitch, and I came across this like really cool AI live stream. It was basically Trump or Biden 2024. That's what it was called. And it was basically an AI version of Trump and AI version of Biden debating each other in their voices, lip synced. And then they would basically be responding. They'll be roasting the chat as it goes. And it was hella funny. It was getting so many donos. I was just watching the content for like 2 hours. It was so funny. And then it was also like they were just like using swear words and stuff. So it was like people were just like literally laughing. So it's really funny. And I was like, wow, it's interesting. It's like, how do they even do this? Like, how are they lip syncing this? So I was like, basically looking into that, and I found this model called Wave to Lip, and that's what they were using. And voice cloning was obviously 11 Labs, something like that. It's like, wow, this is so cool. I wonder if you can just do it with any character. So I basically started building, so I was like, who should I do? I'm like, I like Paul Graham. I like his essays. I read him a lot. So I'm like, okay, let's do Paul Graham, because I think Twitter would also like it. So I basically took an interview that he did for TechCrunch, I think, from YouTube, and then took out the piece, a certain segment, and then edited it so that it would just loop that. And then I also added like lip syncing, voice cloning, and then I connected it to the Twitch chat. So it'd be like a persistent live stream of him talking. But because it was from an actual interview, it'd be like moving gestures and stuff. Like, he'd be rubbing his nose and stuff like that. So it'd seem like it was real, but he would also be talking, but he'd be responding to the chat. So in the Twitch chat, whenever you do !PG space, whatever you want to say, he will basically respond to that. So that was basic idea. I want to see like how it would work, what would the setup would be like. So yeah, so that was like the weekend before like Build Space IRL. So I was like, okay, this is cool. I just tweet about it, launched that. It was twitch.tv/notpaulgraham. So it was just like a really fun experiment that I did. We had, I forgot, but the total number of users that came by was more than 1,000, I think. But the one lesson I learned was it was really hard to keep like a high concurrent like number of users, because a fraction of the people watching the stream will chat, right? So all the content, all the entertaining content comes from the people chatting, right? You don't want them to just be idle, right? And I had loops for that when it would be idle. But I realized that if there's not an interesting conversation going on, people would just come and then leave. And because there's no one there, anyone who comes after that would be like, oh, there's no one here, and just leave, right? So in my subsequent versions, I then updated so that you'd be talking about random stuff. It respond to random users, essentially. And then I was trying to see if that would help the average user count. But yeah, and then I tried out with different characters. I tried Donald Trump, Mark Zuckerberg, stuff like that.
And Gary Tan came through?
Yeah, so like when we did the Paul Graham thing, I didn't know that Gary Tan came through. I was like literally on the way home. And then a Bill Space team member, Amit, he DM'd me on Twitter saying, dude, I think Gary Tan's in your live stream. And then he screenshotted it, and it was a user named the real Gary Tan or something. And then someone was asking me, are you the real Gary Tan? He's like, yeah. And then so he was in the stream. And then I saw him at a recent event, and I basically went up to him and asked him, was it actually you? And he was like, yeah, he came by, he liked it. But, yeah, it was nice.
And how do you think about project selection? So you launch a bunch of different things.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them are very consumer focused.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them have the potential to go viral.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them do go viral.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think about choosing what to work on?
Well, basically, as long as it's something new for me, like I need to find it. As long as it's like something interesting, something I can learn for me, I just build it out. Mostly out of curiosity, and I always launch it because like, why not?
Yeah.
So that's like always been my mindset. Like when I started like the music models, I was mostly interested in okay, how does AI training like work? Like how do you train like AI models? So I was like cold emailing like research. So I would be reading research papers. Like during high school, like I'd be like reading like AI research papers, and then like cold emailing the researchers because they would often work on data sets. Sometimes they would work on data sets that weren't public, but so I was like cold emailing this researcher, and I got him. He now I think works at ByteDance, but I got him.
How the mighty have fallen.
I think he was in the UK. He was doing music research, and I cold emailed him. He was kind enough to like then spend an entire Saturday sending me the entire data set that he was using, and so that's how I was like that got me more interested in training AI models, and then the whole deepfake stuff. I was just more interested, like, how the hell are they doing the lip syncing? That just felt novel to me. So I was like, okay. And then I found this open source model, and shout out to Prodi Sync Lab. He's the one that's building that. But yeah, it was a really good experience. I launched deepfakes at low because it's really hard to hit the high average like concurrent users on the live streams. So I'm like, people find this novel, people like the experience, but I can't bootstrap the live stream. So I was like, okay, what about if I make it just as a website, then people can still get the novel effect, novel user experience, without needing 10, 50 or 100 concurrent users.
For everyone listening, deepfakes.lol is a site that you can go in and basically make Trump or any other famous person say anything that you want, and it'll lip sync whatever text you provide it. It'll say it in their voice and match the lips to that audio.
Yeah, so I think I have like around 40 characters. But essentially, you can basically pick a character, enter what you want them to say, and then it will use them in a real scene. It will just lip sync them to say whatever you want. The interesting learning I found from that was something I did not expect. So when I launched that, I was afraid like people would be like creating like wild messages and like putting them online. What I actually found that almost all the usage was basically like people creating messages for their friends and sending it directly to their friends. So they didn't even want the thing public. Like they would directly, like they would make the character say something about a friend and then send it to him. I was doing like user interviews. I had like, some people like send out like eight messages to like people, like 8 different people, like creating like a video for each. And I found that to be really interesting. That was never something I thought like people would do. So then because then the product grows like through the private DMs, right? It doesn't grow through public social media. Whereas I thought that it would grow through the public social media. So that was like something that was like a really counterintuitive learning from that. But so yeah, that was really interesting. So I learned that.
So you mentioned in college, you were reading research papers. What interesting research have you come across recently?
Recently, I would say the most interesting one would be this paper called Animate Diff. A person from Founders Inc. actually showed it to me. It was really cool. Essentially what it does is you see like the video generation models, right? Gen 2, stuff like that. This is basically an open source model that works with any stable diffusion model to generate animations. So it basically, they trained this like little module called like the motion module that you then plug into any stable diffusion module, and then you put in a prompt saying like, I don't know, a dog drinking water or something like that. And it would generate like a pretty good the frame rate is pretty low, but like it's pretty good. It has like very less, if very low flickering, almost no flickering, and it's super cool because the quality is actually really good. So this is like one of the first like animation modules or video generation models that's open source and also like super cool. Like it's actually good enough. So I saw like some scenes that people create like complex workflows to generate 5 seconds of a really good scene, which is actually really interesting because before like, that was basically not possible with open source, and now it's barely possible. So now the models will just get better. There'll be open source models, I hopefully, in the next few months, train on more data.
What's an example?
I was going to say, when you say like a workflow to do this, what does that look like?
So there are like a lot of open source tools for stable diffusion. There's one called Automatic. There's one called Comfy UI. So for the one that called Comfy UI, you can build like these complicated workflows like nodes. Imagine like a whole graph, essentially, where you can be like, okay, load the stable diffusion model. Here's the prompt, refine it a little bit, upscale the final image. So there's a lot of different components you can do. And people build these elaborate workflows, like these elaborate graphs to generate the final asset. And then it encodes the entire graph within the file's metadata. So then you would just drag and drop an image or asset generated through that workflow into that tool. It will just recreate the entire workflow. So what people do is to generate, because this video generation, like animative, uses stable diffusion, it's actually, you can just use it with any stable diffusion tool, essentially. So there are extensions people have built, like Comfy UI and Automatic, where you can just like plug that extension in and generate videos with the same tool that generates images, which is really cool because if you think about it, there are 2 different modalities, and one tool is able to do it because all the model, like the asset creation, is going into these models. So the tools, as long as the tools for the models work for any different checkpoints, and you can just reuse the same model or the same tools to create all these different modalities, which is super cool.
Yeah, that is pretty insane. Speaking of Comfy UI, have you used it a bunch in the past?
I've used it like a few times recently, like barely. I'm still like I'm a noob in that tool. I still need to watch like a lot more YouTube tutorials. But I've seen people's workflows, and it's just like wild. Like to create them, it's going to take a long time. I feel like I still need to master it. It's definitely for power users. It's not trying to do like the Lexica experience where you just text into prompt. It's more like if you want to like do like advanced, like really good like assets. Like now you can do videos, but like images, stuff like that, where you want a lot of control, then it's really powerful for that.
Speaking of power users, Sharif is a power user of Comfy UI.
That's how I first found out about Comfy UI.
Yeah, me too.
It was on a Sunday. I came to Effing, and he was like working on this complicated workflow, this complicated graph. I'm like, what is it? And he was like trying to figure out some way to improve the image quality a lot by mixing different models and stuff like that. But I was like, damn, this is so cool. And you can drag and drop any image generated from it. You can share it. So that was super cool. I was like, yeah.
Should we talk about some ideas?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So before this, Ash come prepped with some ideas, and you have a few. So I'll let you also take a look, and then we can just pick. You can just pick the one that you like.
Let's go AI commit messages.
All right, so
pick the one right to the top of the list.
I know,
he
but
did no work. He was just like, "Fuck
it."
I'm not going to read anything past the first line.
This one was like, I think people have. I've seen some open source projects actually that do this, but essentially the idea is just because I never come up with like commit messages, to be honest. I just have this one liner, and it's like git add, and then git commit WP, like, and message is just WIP, and then git push. I just have that one liner. I just run it every time I need to sync it. It's really bad. It's not actually best practices, but so I was thinking, okay, it'd be cool to see the diff and then have AI. You're gonna use GPT-4, just come up with a commit message and do that. But I think the idea is also more, can you build a smarter version control system as well that automatically tracks changes? You can understand the changes that are made to the code over time. And so if you can automatically keep version control the code in the background so I don't have to do it, that'd be pretty cool. So this is the reason I wrote this down, because of kind of like you can extend beyond this idea to something probably a bit more automatic and in the background. So you don't have to, as a developer, you don't have to worry about like, oh, did I create the right checkpoint, like the right commit? And then over time, it just creates the right commits, and you can just go back to them by being like, okay, what's the commit where I like added this particular component, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's the problem that I have with commit messages, because I try to write good commit messages, because like sometimes you do have to go back, pull code from a couple months ago. It's not that often, but it's just so hard. Like you were like copying Shaw's and like, is it this one? Is it
Right.
this one? It seems like you never can find it very easily.
Right.
I think that's a really cool idea. I saw this company, I think it's called 10.dev. They're a YC company. They're doing something like similar to what you were just talking about. And they had an extra thing in there, which was it would analyze the diff, and then I think it was as part of the commit message or as part of the commit process, it would ask the user, hey, why did you make this change? So like, you changed the auth service to require a token here. Why'd you make that change? So then you actually get like the kind of social context around some of the, rather than just like the code changes. So I thought that was a really cool idea, and I can imagine a world where that becomes pretty mainstream and you actually have this like running log of the conversation that happened around changes and like the purpose for them.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, I can see that being super useful.
Yeah, but yeah, I love the idea of like LLMs as helpers for coders, you know, for like just like doing little tasks here and there.
Right.
We're going to see a lot of really cool tools around that. And AI commit messages seems like a fairly low-hanging one.
I feel like it's it's like a good starting point.
Yeah.
Where you start there, because it's so ingrained in the developer workflow. Like no matter what tool you use, you're most likely going to have to go do this one step. So you start here and branch off towards like more of the developer workflow.
Yeah, it's like action produces information. You do this one thing, and then you find out, oh, like there's this other thing,
right?
And this is other thing, and then you slowly expand from there.
Right. I feel like and also it's like very easy to build, but also produces a lot of value, right? Because if you want to go back, then it's like really good, right? So you start there. High ROI, and then you just build better developer experience.
Nice. All right. A really smart home automation system with GPT-4 vision.
Yes. So I got into programming because I watched the Iron Man 1 movie. So I read an HTML book before, a few years before, and like when I was growing up, and it's like I hated it. I'm like, there's no way programming is really cool. And then I watched Iron Man 1, the whole Jarvis AI. I'm like, holy smokes, this is so interesting. And that's what got me into programming. So I started like Windows speech commands, stuff like that, watching YouTube tutorials. There were actually a lot of YouTube videos showing how to create Jarvis back at the time. And this was all Windows speech commands. And there was this one guy building it in C#. So I started learning C#. So that was like my first thing. So this was like during my gap year in high school. So that's when I started learning the code. So so I was like really interested in like home automation because I was like, that's basically like Jarvis. You can tell it to do stuff, right? Back then the tech wasn't really that good. Now it's like definitely possible. I had a friend from Bill Space who was demoing me like GPT Vision, and it was so good. It's so smart. And so I was like, for example, he took a picture a bit far away from his computer and asked like what he was doing. And I was able to figure out the websites on the screen that he was doing.
Oh, shit.
And like why he might be doing that. And a little bit of context, he's probably in an office. And maybe he's a software engineer, stuff like that. And it was like really interesting. Like this is super smart. So I was thinking like a home automation system, like if you have, for example, like small cameras around and you can monitor stuff. So you can monitor the state of the home automatically just through the camera module. And then you can control like the Nest, or you can lock doors or do stuff like that I felt would be pretty cool. And I feel like that's now like that's probably like a weekend project.
Yeah,
you can pull off like if you have GPT-4 access.
One thing I was thinking about is the fridge sometimes is not fully stocked. So if we just had a tiny camera in there and it was like, hey, if the fridge is empty, let me know on Slack. I need to restock the fridge.
And you can even tell it like, okay, which stuff, like what are the things that are like out of stock now? What do we need to refuel? And you can basically come up with that automatically. So that's also, and you can also have it like, what can we cook based on what's in the fridge, stuff like that. So you can do like, so many things now because Vision is like that smart.
Yeah. What are other things? Have you heard about this company called Sentry?
The error logging?
No, not that Sentry. Oh, it's the one where it's basically a security system, and I think they use AI to basically detect anything going on in your house. And if someone's come to your door, if it looks malicious, then it automatically notifies someone. And then they look at the footage. And if there is, then they send like the police to your house. And so it's like a higher end version of security.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And they've been working on it for a while now. I think they have a decent amount of traction. And so that's what this reminded me of. And I'm like, now actually any Joe off the street can now go build this in
Right.
a weekend for their own home.
Right. For that particular product, I haven't heard of it in particular, but I would assume they have to do face detection, they have to like face identification, stuff like that, which is definitely going to probably require like a special model,
Yeah.
a specialized model. But then you can add like reasoning on top of that, like GPT-4, and you can definitely build like a better, more safe experience.
Yeah. What are
So-
some other ideas that you could do with this? Thinking inside the home
with
helping
with
automation?
GPT
Yeah, vision.
vision.
Yeah.
I mean, I like the simple one because it's useful, right? I mean, there's a bunch of them like, hey, your plant is dying or your plant has mites. Here's what you can do about it. I mean, I think maybe not necessarily in the home, but expanding from that greenhouse stuff, right? Crops, especially like indoor crops. You could put cameras and monitor them. I'm sure that there are companies that do this already, but I think it's mostly just like the barrier to entry is now much, much lower.
Right.
You could train custom models for any of the things that we're talking about, but now high
It's gonna
schoolers
get easy,
could go
yeah.
build this. Yeah.
100%. And the whole automation thing is going to get super interesting when you add in robotics. So that's when, because with GPT-4 Vision, you can understand the state of something, the state of a physical place. And then if you want to change the state or make some changes, then you can send API calls to the robots, for example, to do certain stuff. So that would be like super cool, even if it's indoor personal home robots or stuff like that, or maybe in a commercial setting. I thought that was like a pretty cool project that you can actually hack on as a hacker, which is super cool.
Oh shit! What if we made like a self-driving little toy car? So you know the ones that you do with like remote control,
Right.
and it's, you have no idea what's going on, and it just says, "Hey, turn left, turn right." You actually just programmed into the thing. So it takes, using vision, it takes like a photo every so often, and it's just going really slowly, and then it like is auto hooked up to the controls, and then it just like changes if there's like an obstacle in the way.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, you can actually do that. I think the only thing would be like it would be much
So
slower,
slow, yeah.
so slow because you have to go through the LLM
Yeah,
loop.
you just go crawling along.
But
be
it would actually
interesting
work.
if you could get it to like plan a route. Like, here's a picture of like, the office. Okay, you're gonna go 6 feet forward, 3 feet right, and then turn left and go 4 feet.
Right.
And so you only have to take one picture every so often.
Oh, you know what might work? I don't even know if this is possible, but if you can take multiple images. So you add an image of the office floor plan, for example, and then you add an image, you take an image of where the robot, like the car is right now. I feel like it could probably reason, okay, I'm in the kitchen. It seems like this is the kitchen. Look at the floor plan. Okay, I'm in the kitchen. I need to go this way to go here. And that's, you could probably build like specialized like localization, like you can use specialized localization techniques for that, but it's really cool that one model can now do that. Like, that's the cool part. And it might be slow now, but man, if you can really get the inference speed like really high, like that's so cool. Yeah, you can.
OpenAI, they released Whisper last year, and they released GPT-4 in March, and then they just released their chat features, right? Or they're just starting to come out where they're actually, I think on the back end, it seems like they're streaming input into Whisper and then streaming tokens out of Whisper into the LLM, and then the LLM can start responding in streaming as well. So you can have this full circle where it's all real time and you get the latency down very, very low. I think it enables some interesting use cases, especially for like speech assistants and that sort of thing. I wonder if they will go the same route with their vision models where you'll actually be able to stream like video or maybe just like really low frame rate video, right? Like 3 frames a second or something, but you can do it in real time. So you can create that like live feedback loop of like model detecting something, taking an action, getting feedback. Because right now those iteration cycles are just very, very low.
Oh, that's true. That's true. That would be like hella cool. Yeah, if they had like video support, and they're definitely gonna add it. It's just a matter of time. But once they add it, yeah, even the frame rate could be like super low. That's not a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can take one picture like every 10 or 15, 30 seconds. It'd still be really good.
I do wonder how like with the barrier to entry being like so much lower for some of these like pretty complicated products, right? Like greenhouse monitoring. In my mind, I'm like, that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to install into a greenhouse, and there's probably like big annual contracts to maintain that software. What happens to the incumbents in that market when like 10 people can go compete with them and their costs are still very high. They're on this old software. Like it feels like we're hitting this inflection point, or maybe more of like a step function, where there's just the whole market dynamic has changed now for these companies.
Yeah, like what's defensible and stuff like that, and like where incumbents will be able to be. Yeah, I haven't really given that much thought to that, because I clearly know whatever answer I have is probably going to be wrong. So right now I'm just like focused on this building stuff that like people like, and then figuring out like value capture later. But it is such an interesting question, because because the AI is also like incumbents can also incorporate it, right? They often have a lot of advantages, right? They have like data, they have like, existing customer relationships, stuff like that, where startups have like execution speed, stuff like that. So yeah, it'll be really interesting to watch. I'm actually really curious to know the answer. I have no clue.
Did you hear him earlier? He's like, yeah, I'm just trying to build things people like, and then he whispers and figure out value capture later.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. No, I think you're like totally on though. It's really hard to know what will happen. I think so many companies are faced with the ultimate innovator's dilemma right now, which is, hey, the best move is probably like lay off half your engineering team, because you don't need to develop these models in-house anymore.
Right.
And
oftentimes there's also oftentimes like innovators, I've seen it also play out in other ways, where I've talked to some companies who like cannot use like any generative AI like technology, because their customers are like people who create that type of content, for example, so they don't want to disintermediate their own customers, stuff like that. So
what's an example
what do you mean
of that?
So let's say like it's a company that allows you to share like it's software for like artists, for example, share like files, stuff like that. You don't want to disintermediate the artists themselves, right?
So Spotify, for example.
Yeah, it's really weird when it gets to that state. Yeah, I'm really curious to see like how the whole like how labels, for example, in the music space, how that plays out, because there's still a lot of value. Consumers would love that type of experience. So I feel like there's still a lot of value there, but it's just really interesting to see how this plays out.
Yeah,
stuff like that.
These misaligned incentives, crazy. Yeah, it's gonna be pretty interesting. All right, last one. Rewind AI, but uses GPT-4 vision to understand user intent from desktop screenshots.
Yeah, so like Rewind AI, it's basically a tool that basically captures like screenshots of your computer every few seconds, and then you can basically search through that, which is pretty cool. I was just thinking, GPT-4 vision, at least from my experience last night, I was like, damn, you can actually understand intent, right? So you can do like normal OCR on the screenshots, but if you give it like a few images apart from each other and ask, what is the user trying to do? Now the software can actually understand the user's intent from just watching their screen. And so you can do a lot of cool stuff. Like you then be like, okay, maybe I should add this to it. Maybe I should add this like new to-do item to their like reminders, because I see them trying to do this. So make sure they do it. Or maybe the user sees an email saying that they have to do this by this time, so maybe I'll just add it to the calendar. Stuff like that. So you can do more contextual actions. Once you understand user intent, you can do a lot of cool things. So I was thinking, yeah, maybe Rewind should even just do this.
Yeah, that is pretty interesting, right? You go from capturing to inferring and then prompting, or doing things in advance. It's like the ultimate EA is like the person that figures out like the things that you do on a recurring basis. Don't worry, I got it handled. So like, what if this is that, or like some version towards that, where it's, oh, every day at this time you do this action. Hey, I can just automate that for you. Or hey, you usually meet this person at this time. Do you want me to set up a recurring meeting? Yeah, I think
the main thing with this approach is the privacy aspect. Where like you can't actually just use GPT-4 vision, because you'll be sending the screenshots to OpenAI, right? So once open source models though come up, like whatever GPT-4 vision can do, they're open source equivalents that can run on like a MacBook, even if it's only on the higher end MacBooks. That would be like the huge unlock.
That's really interesting. I haven't seen anything online. I'm curious if you have, about multimodal open source models like Llama going multimodal, or some of the other. Mistral is the big one right now. Yeah,
Mistral like 7B, right? They're LLM. Yeah, I haven't seen any multimodal model yet, but I haven't seen any open source ones yet.
Yeah,
I think I saw one that was not open source called, I think, Yasa One, I think, on Twitter. I was trying to it basically does stuff similar to GPT-4 vision, but I think the open source community will probably figure out like clever hacks to get to 80% of what GPT-4 vision can do with just like small extensions,
Yeah.
stuff like that. So I feel like that's probably what it would look like in open source. But it's only a matter of time. I don't see they're not existing in open source version.
Yeah. Yeah, the Rewind product is really interesting. I've been thinking about something similar just based on your browsing history. So rather than trying to capture everything on your desktop, it's like a Chrome extension, monitors all the pages that you visit and gives you some kind of like recap or helps you find pages that you had seen before, that sort of thing. But that gets at this bigger idea of like passive personal data capture where you have things that are just monitoring you and organizing your life in certain ways. So like Tab and the pendant that Rewind launched this week. I think we'll see more of that kind of stuff going forward. Even having cameras in your house is another version of that, right? You build these huge like data lakes of like personal data or office data, whatever it is. And then you let the AI do its thing and it finds the patterns and organizes the data as it best sees fit.
Those are like the ideas you just mentioned, like Tab, for example. Those are particularly interesting because like with LLMs, they can operate on a lot of like contextual data really well, right? So now it's like as LLMs get better, the device or like the methods of getting the contextual data, like the need for that will also increase. So by just having something like that just records and then creates like a knowledge graph, for example, that kind of as LLMs become, as they get better and more important, like the need for that will also increase because the experience will just be a lot better. If ChatGPT knows like a lot about your information, for example, has a lot of context, we'll just have a better experience, right? So yeah, those I feel like there's a lot of cool trends that like with the wave of LLMs like it will unlock.
Yeah. Well, and if you think about a product like Tab, like a year ago, it would be like, why are you recording yourself all the time? What are you going to do with that? Right. You're never going to listen to any of that. And you'd probably be right. Like, no one's ever going to go back and listen to that. But I think that whole field has just changed very dramatically.
Right.
And I think we'll see more things like that. I'm personally like super excited for that. I think those will be really cool.
And I feel like it's a perfect idea for like a startup because they do it in at least as far as I think Tab does it in a privacy safe way where like they create a knowledge graph instead of storing all the transcripts and stuff like that. But like any big company would be hesitant to do something like this right now immediately because it would be like always on, right? And so they would have that whole image they need that they have to show to consumers, right? Where a startup has nothing to lose. They could run this experiment and see if it will work, right? So like those are really interesting ideas. Yeah.
All right. Final words, because I got to bounce. Anything that we didn't cover that you want us to cover?
No, I thought we covered a lot of cool ground. Yeah, it was super interesting.
Nice. Cool.